All right. Please stand and cover yourselves for the reading of our verses today. Not what some of you are thinking. Our first verse is from the letter of Ruth, not Ruth, but her name was actually Ruth. Chapter 3, verse 9. It says, Vayomer mi'at. Va'atomer. Wow, where did that come from? Va'atomer anochi Ruth. Amatecha ufarasta chenafecha al amatecha ki goel ata. And to read it like someone who actually knows what it says, Vayomer mi at. Vayomer miat. Miat. Because I think it scared him. Vatomer anohi Ruth amataha. Anyway. I'm in a very weird mood today. Next one is Psalm 91:1. You guys all have it memorized by heart, right? Yoshev beseter elyon be'el shaddai. El Shaddai. Anyway. Yit lonan. And then moving down a couple of verses to verse 4. Be'evrato yasech la ve'tachat kenafaiv Techshe zina ve'sochera amito. All right, so you may be seated. And stuffing things. As some of you may have noticed, that wasn't the law, was it? This past week, I received an email from someone asking for a copy of a message I taught some years back. I spent, I think, close to 2 hours, maybe a little more, trying to find a copy of that verse, but to no avail. I couldn't find a video copy of it. I couldn't find it in, like on an actual DVD. I couldn't find it in my archive of videos. I couldn't find even the text for, the notes that I had prepared umpteen years ago. I couldn't find it at all. It was just not there. I've been spending a lot of time going to doctor's appointments these past few weeks. One of them is trying to get my blood pressure down so I can safely take a stress test on my heart. And nobody at this point thinks anything's wrong with my heart, but because of the chest pains, I have to go through all this, right? But they couldn't do it because my blood pressure they've never had it under control. So he gave me some more medicine to try to bring it down. But it's come down so low that I fight all day long to stay awake. And then, was it yesterday or day before? Day before, I went in and had the scope thing he put down my throat, to look at my stomach and all that. And they took some biopsies and whatnot. So my throat's a little sore and dry, and I'm so tired I can barely hold my eyelids up. What to do with the baby was there last I had him in my arms. He didn't want to go to sleep so bad that he literally took his finger and pushed his eyelid up and was holding the thing open. That's what I'm going to have to get some toothpicks or something to keep going. I'll try my best. It's got me feeling punch drunk, goofy and all that stuff. So to say the least, I've not been able to concentrate and thus do not have this week's lesson on the law ready. So, in honor of the olden days, we're going old school, and I'm revamping a message called In His Shadow. We begin today with Ruth, also known as Ruth, chapter 3, verse 9. Literally in English, if I translate the Hebrew just into literal English, it's goes like this. And he said, "Who you?" Miat, miat, miat. Who you? And she said, "Me, Ruth, servant you. Now spread you, wing you on servant you, because kinsman you." You can kind of get that if you read it over and over. But it started off with the Vayomer, and he said, it's to say, the primary signification is to bear forth, hence to bring light. To say, it's to shed light on the subject. Just saying. When I'm saying what I'm saying. The next word, me, which who, and then ot, the Hebrew word ot. So who you? Who are you? Who is it? What's going on? Because she woke him up, so he was startled, right? Then she says, now remember, he said ba yomer, and then she says ba to mer. So it's and he said, now it's and she said. It's the same thing to say. The primary signification is to bear forth, hence to bring light, to say, to shed light on the subject, people. Then it's Anochi. This is, I suppose it could really be said about Hebrew, but there is kind of a kingly, proper Hebrew from the early days of the Jews. And then there's a more slangy, ordinary, everyday people usage of words. Anochi is the more kingly, if you will, instead of saying ani. And you see it both ways all throughout the scriptures, but generally the older books, Ruth being one of them, they use the more proper, more kingly sounding. So it's just me, myself, and I. You can use any of those three words that you like. You shouldn't use all three, I'm just saying. And then it says, so she says, basically she says, Anochi, so she's saying, I root. We would say in English, I'm root, or I am root, right? If root was your name. So that's all she said there. Then it says, Amataha. Literally, that's servant you. And of course, we turn everything around backwards in America, so it's we would say your servant. Or if we're going to use an olden King James Bible type term, we'd say your handmaid. Your handmaiden. It's a female handmaid, a female slave. Used even of a free woman, which obviously Ruth was a free woman, when speaking to her superiors. So it's kind of like calling a man sir in this case. I think that's probably enough, So she's saying, I'm your servant, your humble servant. The English did that, didn't they? I am but your humble servant, because that carried over from the Hebrew Bible when it was translated in the English language, and they began to read in the early, in the 1200s and 1300s, in the early days of English, they would read the Queen's English. The Queen's Bible, I think, was the earlier one, and then later on in the late 1500s going into 1611, then you get the King James Version, and so that's really, I think, more of the 1500s that carries over, because that's, I guess we call that the King's English, and the one from the 1200s is going to be the Elizabethan English. Not a lot of difference, but some notable differences, but basically still the English language. And by the way, between the 1200s and the 1500s, the way words were spelled was massively different. Just saying. Same word, same meaning, just the spelling just kept changing and changing and changing. Of just typical words, even the word the changed. So, anywho, she's just saying it's your servant. It's me, Ruth, your servant. Then it says ufa rasta. This is interesting because literally it's and spread you, or now. The vav is a conjunction technically, but if we think of it in very literal, what a conjunction is in the English language, sometimes we'll not quite understand the Hebrew, because their idea of a conjunction in biblical Hebrew and the idea of a conjunction in the English language aren't exactly the same, but they're pretty close. That's all I'm saying. So we use this word for but, which is still, what I just call it? Conjunction. That's still a conjunction. And in this case, the word now, N-O-W, right now, here and now. It's used in that way as well. I think that it translates best if we say now spread you. So she says, what it means, this spread, is to break into pieces, to give. What are they talking about? Well, if you take a loaf of bread and you break it all up and pass out the parts, you've spread out the bread, right? It's to expand. It's to spread out, which comes from the idea of being broken apart and arranged, like having communion by breaking up the bread, if you will. It's to spread upon the ground, to take a garment and spread it on the ground, like you're going to have a picnic or something, or in their case, sleep on it. Then it says, chenafecha. So it's wing you. It's a wing, so-called from its covering. Poetically, the wings of the wind, the wings of the morning, on account of the rapidity of the moving on of the winds and the morning. So if you think about the wings flapping very fast, so they can get their takeoff and get their flight and fly away, the morning moves on. So it's here in one moment it's morning, and the next morning it's day, right? Or the next moment it's day. And one, what was the other one? Winds. 1 minute the wind's here, the next minute it's gone. It's not that the wind's going 1,000 miles an hour. It's just here and then it's gone, right? And so that's the idea behind the rapidity, the word that Jacinius used. Often also used metaphorically of care and protection, of an edge, extremity of a garment, the skirt, if you will. The skirts of a mantle, as in Zechariah 8:23, the skirt, speaking of the mantle, of a man who is a Jew. From the Orientals having been accustomed at night to wrap themselves in their mantles. This expression is used for the edge of a bed covering, because, well, basically that was your bed covering, right? So this is what they're talking about, by the way. Going back to the time of Ruth, it would probably have been something like this. If it would have been worn this way, with a hole cut out for the head, you would have thought of it as a poncho. But as time went on, it became basically just a towelette. The name comes from talit, which is the Hebrew word, but we call them towelette. Literally, where that comes from. But so they call it a bed covering, not because they were putting it on a bed, but because at night, you wrap yourself up in it, and that's how you stay warm. That's your bed covering, if you will. So she's sitting there saying, spread your skirt, your wing. That's called your wing. Why is it called your wing? Well, if you look at these, what's that look like to you? It's the wings. So anyway, spread your wings over your handmaid, over your servant. And we haven't gotten to this part, so I'm going to leave it out. Wait. Or am I at that part? I guess I'm at that part. That's funny. So she tells him that who she is, and then she says to him, spread out your wing. So it's saying, spread out your skirt, your wing, over your handmaid. And in other words, take me to your couch as your wife. Couch we think of as bed now. We think of a couch as something very different in our world today, but back then a couch was a bed. So what happened here? Ruth just popped the question. Yeah, she just asked him to be her husband. That's really what happened. Then it says all, spread out on, all, the Hebrew word all, not our word all. So it means on or upon. Then it says amatacha, that's your servant. He, which means because. Goel, kinsman. It's to redeem, to buy back, as a field or a farm sold. A thing consecrated to God, a slave. Redeemer of a field. Redeemer of a woman in this case. Of course, to redeem her, he has to buy a field. Very frequently used of God as redeeming men, especially Yisrael, as out of the slavery of Mitzrayim, or Egypt, from the Babylonian captivity and, of course, other dispersions. Someone who is near of kin, a relative. I should say this because in our world we think of the near kinsman as like, we know about the verse that talks about if a man dies and his wife doesn't have a child, his brother is to take the woman and marry her and have a child with her and name that child for that husband that died, and everything that belonged to that husband will now be passed down to this son. And he literally will not be the son of the man who fathered him. Although that man will raise him and the child will think of him as his dad, he'll inherit everything from the other man, right? And so we think of that as the brother-in-law and sister-in-law doing this. And though that is allowable, that's not at all what the Hebrew text meant. And yes, the Jews did go down that route very quickly. But a brother in Hebrew is a Jew. If you're a Jew, your brother is a Jew. So your kinsman being related to you, that could be somebody that you have no blood relation to at all. But if you're Jewish and you live according to God's law and you marry someone Jewish that's according to the law, who lives according to the law, then your brother and sister, if you follow what I'm saying, in the eyes of God. That's why church people run around calling each other brother and sister, right? Because they're all serving the same God. And so they call each other brother and sister. That comes from this. So you have to understand that just because they're saying kinsman does not necessarily mean that there's somebody in the bloodline. Now, Boaz was kind of distant, but he was in the bloodline. All right, so the right of redemption and the office of avenging bloodshed belong to the nearest kinsman and the nearest relative. Again, God did not say it had to be nearest. It was the Jews who added the nearest part. But that's okay. It doesn't hurt anything. We're not talking about your brother or your parent or something like that. That would never be allowed. It was never allowed. It would never be allowed. But by nearest, they just meant, your cousin, that sort of thing, your somebody like that. Then Boaz said, if there be a closer relative and he is willing, let him marry you. But if not, I will. It's important for several reasons to know that Boaz said this, because she just asked the question, and his response to her is, well, if there's a closer relative, because by now they've got their fence built around the law of God. The God said it had to be a kinsman. It did not, a brother, if you will, or kinsman. And it became, well, then which one has the right or has the duty, more likely, because you get all these guys that don't want to have to mess with that woman over there. Maybe they didn't like the one that their brother picked or their cousin picked or whatever, and which may well be the case here. We don't know why the near kinsman turned her down. The nearer in relation turned her down. We don't know. And everyone that says that they do is they don't. It's not. We're not told, so we don't know. It's all pure conjecture to think that we do. So, but he's telling her, listen here. If someone closer decides that they'll buy back your land and redeem you and take you as your wife, because those go hand in hand. You can't have the one without the other. But if somebody else will do that, then he'll have to marry you. You'll have to marry him. But if not, I'll do it. So if we're all adults here, let me say this. She popped the question. He told her, hey, we may not get married. And yes, they did sleep with each other all the way. Can I just leave it at that? Yes, that happened. That's what the Hebrew text is telling you. Extramarital. They were not married. Them getting together that night did not make them married, like some people try to say. It didn't. They had to go through go to the council and all that kind of stuff before that could even happen. And this was the night before any of that took place. So just for your own information, the Jewish world did not hold the same sensitivities toward extramarital when it was two grown consenting adults that Christianity has so long held. I don't know that they do anymore, but they did for centuries, right? All right. So we're going to compare one word that came from this verse to another one. In Ezekiel 16:8, I've just kind of revamped the King James to make it more modern. It said, "Now when I passed by you," this is God talking, "when I passed by you and looked upon you, behold, your time was the time of love. And I spread my skirt, my wing, my kanaf over you, and covered your nakedness." Now, that didn't mean that Israel was literally running around without clothes on. Nakedness in Hebrew is having no defense, no protection. So when God surrounded her with his skirt, his kanaf, his wings, she was protected from her enemy. This is, "Yea, I swore to you and entered into a covenant with you, says the Lord God." So he called himself by his proper name because God is spelled in all caps. "And you became mine." That's when Yisrael became God's acquired possession, when they entered into covenant. Of course, the word that was used here literally is kenafi. Kanaf is the root word, right? The wings, so called from this covering, poetically used, of the wings of the wind and the wings of the morning because of their rapidity. Remember all that? So he's using exactly the same word. So let's move on to our next verse, which is Psalm 91:1. This is many a person's most favorite verse in all of human history, in all of the Bible. I'm telling you, this would be the one, right? Now, literally in English, it would say, "He dwells in secret place most high, in shadow breast me, he shall abide." You know it. "He that abides in the secret place of the Most High will dwell under the shadow of the Almighty," right? You've heard that. Okay, so it starts off with Yoshev, he dwells, literally. And we would say he that dwells, but it's to sit down. Also to be seated, to be sitting. Habitations, places, a throne, a bed. Obviously, it's not to sit on a bed, though you could. I kind of sleep that way. To remain, to abide, to dwell, to reside, to stay, to have your home, to inhabit, to live in, to occupy, to reside in. You get the idea. This is dwelling. This is way more than just sitting on a chair. Then it says beseter, in secret place, literally, in secret place. It's a hiding. It's something secret, clandestine, concealed, undercover, hidden, especially a veil, covering a curtain, covering, comma, a curtain, comma, protection, comma, defense, right? It's all those things. So if you think about the temple, there was a veil that went between the holy place and the holy place, right? And that concealed the Ark of the Covenant from prying eyes. Then it says Elyon. Well, that's most high. High, higher, supreme, most high. It's used almost exclusively of God, though I shouldn't say almost exclusively. You really kind of use that of the highest point of a mountain, the highest point of a tree. So it's not really exclusively of God. But if it says El Elyon, you can bet that's exclusively of God. Then it says Betzel, in shadow. Well, you know what a shadow is, right? You're walking along, the sun's beating down, you see a little shadow on the ground. So that's what we're talking about. Then it says Shaddai. And literally that's breast me. Because remember, this is God speaking. It's not somebody talking about God. It's actually a prophecy as if God is speaking it. So my breast, God's saying my breast. It's most, they say most powerful, almighty. Shaddai gets translated as almighty. Jacinius says it is from the root Shaddad. However, Jacinius also says that when Shaddad is conjugated out to Shaddai, it is only used as a verb in the bad sense, which would change the meaning to the violently acting God, or God the oppressor, or God the destroyer. That's what this would actually mean. He that hides under the shadow of God the destroyer, God the oppressor, the violently acting God. Are you following what I'm saying? Not right, is it? Verbrugge, in his book Denominum Hebraorum, my Latin really sucks. He wrote that in 1752. In his book and in Elwall's Hebrew Grammar on pages 298 and 423, if you get the same version that Gesenius used, they believed it was from the root shad, which means breast. Conjugating shad out to Shaddai makes the meaning my breast. It is the picture of someone at the breast, the giving and sustaining of life. And this is, in fact, what we're talking about. This, I'm saying breast, I'm using that, I can't think of another word, but in a very broad sense here. It's a very specific part of the breast. I'm trying to keep it family friendly here, but you guys hopefully get what I'm saying. Then it says Yit Lonan, he shall abide. It's to pass the night, to lodge. It's not the same word. It's from the root word loon, not like Looney Tunes, but like Luna, right? That's a word that was stolen from Hebrew. Just saying. To pass the night, to lodge, also to turn in order to lodge, to tarry, to dwell, to continue, to lodge, to remain in any state. In Psalm 23:13, it says, his soul continues in prosperity. In other words, he enjoys continual prosperity. He that remains here, not he that comes and goes. That's very important. He that remains in this place, not he that comes and goes. I'll never forget my mentor from so many years ago talking about his wife coming to him one day and explaining to him that she didn't know who she was coming home to on any given day. Is she going to come home to her husband, the destroyer? Is she going to come home to her husband, the poet? Is she going to come home to her husband, the carpenter? I don't know. Just, whatever. She didn't know who she was coming home to. And it hit me real hard because in that moment, I thought that my wife is going through the same thing. She doesn't know who she's going home, who she's coming home to. And so I've worked really hard to be more like God, in that God says he never changes. He remains the same. And we're talking about this very thing. You can't be bouncing in and out of this secret place. For one thing, the more often that you're bouncing in and out of the secret place, more likely it won't be secret anymore, right? Someone's going to eventually see you coming and going. Yeah, that's just a side note, but you get the idea. You've got to remain the same. You've got to strive to be the same everywhere at all times. And that doesn't mean pick the destroyer dude and be that one all the time. No. Let's try to be like God. All right, so our translation of 91:1. He that sits down, inhabits, remains, lives, and occupies the secret place, hidden behind the veil of the supreme, most high God, will continually spend his nights in the shadow of his breast. Don't you love that? That's my kind of amplified version. But he that sits down, inhabits, remains, lives, and occupies the secret place, hidden behind the veil, his wings, of the supreme, most high God, will continually spend his nights in the shadow of his breast. You can spend your nights in the shadow of your sorrow, or you can spend your nights with your head on God's breast, listening to his heartbeat. Let's move on to Psalm 91:4, just a few verses away. Literally in English, in feather he cover you, and under wings his you shall trust. Shield and defense, truth he. So it starts off, be'evrato. Oh, my throat is really drying out. Trying to get through it. We're getting close. Poetically, this word is ascribed to God, a wing feather. A wing feather. It's a feather that goes, that came from a wing. It's just one feather, with which birds soar, such as that of the eagle, the dove, a bird. It is distinguished from the wing itself. It's the feather, a single feather. Yasech, which is literally he cover. It's to weave, to interweave, especially branches to make a hedge or to construct a booth, hence to hedge, to fence. As both booths and hedges are made to protect and guard a booth, a tent. Because remember, this was a nomadic people, so they lived in tents. Their houses moved. But a house could be thought of the same way. Unless it has wheels under it, it won't move, but that's not the point. Hedges are made to protect and guard persons and gardens. To protect, to cover over, and properly indeed used of branches and trees to cover, to hide oneself. So literally, though it's used in singular, you know that it's not speaking of one feather. It's talking about, now think about this. This is God's blanket. This is what Ruth said to Boaz. Cover me with your talit, with your wing. And so it comes around and all of this stuff intertwines, if you will. If you think of a feather, it's the feathers intertwining, right? So there's your idea. He that's got that happening, right? Lach, you, if you do that. V'tachat, under, that's the lower part beneath that which is under. So where are you supposed to be? You're supposed to be under this thing. And you see that if somebody was under here, where would their head be, right? If my wife was here right now, where would she be? Her head would be on my chest. There's your idea. That's what you're supposed to be seeing. It's drawing this very picture for you. Then it says, under kenafai, his wings, this thing. If you're covered with his wing, if he takes you for his bride, I hope you're following that. Then it's techseh. Literally, that's you shall trust. Properly, it's to flee. That don't sound like trust, does it? Especially to take refuge. So you're fleeing to, not away. You follow? To flee somewhere for refuge, to trust in someone, especially in God. It's from the root chush, which is to make haste, to flee with alarm. You're going to go there quickly because you know that's the safe place. If you live in Tornado Alley and you don't have, or if you do have, let's say you have a underground shelter and the alarms go off, what do? You run as quick as you possibly can to get into that underground cellar, right? And if you don't have one, you get in your car and you go, you run across the street to your neighbor's house or across the yard, jump the fence, whatever you have to do. You get in the car and go down the street to somebody you know, right? You're fleeing in a big hurry to go to the place of safety. You need to see it that way, not fleeing. In a sense, you are fleeing from the tornado, if you will, but what you're doing is fleeing to the place of safety. So you're making haste. It's used of the passions of the mind, the pleasures and the lusts. In Ecclesiastes, I can't say the word. I'm sorry, my throat is so sore from this thing and so dry. I'm having trouble saying a lot of words. But in Ecclesiastes 2:25 says, who eats, who makes haste. In other words, who enjoys the pleasures of life. It's an idiom, of course. Or the one who goes out there and lives it. Right? So you're fleeing to life. You're fleeing to that abundance of life. You're fleeing to live it and love it and take life by the horns, you know? To feel, to perceive. It's a passion of the mind and heart, mind and heart being the same thing in Hebrew. And it's getting there quickly. So run hastily to him to enjoy the passion of his mind, which are his passions for your life. The passions of his mind is his passion for your life. The passion of his mind is, pointing up, the passion of his mind is his passion for your life. Then it says, Zina. Well, that's the word for shield. It's of a larger kind of shield, the one that covers the whole soldier. It's not some little bitty thing. It's going to protect your whole body, right? And it's from the root zana, which means to protect. And it's why they call that word a shield, because that's what it does, right? Then it says, Vesochera, and defense. A shield so-called from surrounding. In other words, defending. So they use this word for shield in English. I wouldn't do that because it's not for the shield. It's for what the shield does. It's from the root sehar, which is not in the garage. Sorry. It's to surround. In other words, it's of a tower, of a fortress. It's the defense that's around you, right? And then it says, Amito. So what is this thing that surrounds you? What is this thing that protects you? Amito. Truth, his truth. It's firmness, stability, perpetuity, faithfulness, fidelity, in which anyone consistent and performs promises. It's uprightness, integrity of mind, especially it is integrity of a judge. It's justice. It's sincerity. It's use of the word of God, because you know that the words that came from the mouth of God are just and right and pure and eternal. If God says, which he didn't, by the way, but if God said the sky is blue, it would always be blue. It would never be pink or purple or shades of green, like when a tornado's coming. It would be blue. Of course, God didn't say that, right? But we know that when God said it, that settled it. And it's always going to be that way. Why? Because we know that God doesn't change. And if God doesn't change, his words don't change. And if God is trustworthy, which we know him to be because he doesn't change, then we know we can trust in him. We know that we can find stability in him, and being able to trust him makes us stable, right? So, my very flowery translation, and he will create a hedge by interweaving his feathers all around you. And under his mantle, under his tallit, his bed covering, you will hastily flee for refuge. Get there quickly, people. His pleasures and passions will be like a shield that covers your whole body. His firmness, stability, faithfulness, fidelity, righteousness, and integrity will defend you like a towering fortress. Run to your prayer closet. Do you know what that is? This is what the Jews from times of old, from before the time of the Babylonian captivity. I don't know that it went as far back as Moshe may have, but we don't know for sure. But we do know at least from somewhere just before, during the time of the captivity, this became the prayer closet. And when you went into your prayer closet, you shut the door. Let me shut my door here. What you were doing was shutting out the world. And what you were doing was laying your head on the breast of God. Can you think of a better reason to pray like this? Could you ever even imagine or want to imagine a reason you shouldn't pray like this? When you pray, go into your prayer closet and shut the door, people. Lay your head on his chest. This is the secret place that this scripture is talking to you about. Get there quickly. Hide beneath his wings. When you go there, he will reveal his passion for you, which is his passion for your life. Is this metaphorical? Sort of, but not exactly. How do we get there, Rob? I just don't know. This seems a little out there. Do I grab a pillow and pretend it's God? No. Sorry, friend. I get a lot of joy picking on a friend of mine who said that once. But no. There's an example in the New Testament, and I know that Jews don't like to hear about the New Testament. Well, a lot of Jews don't. But listen, the New Testament, before it was perverted by the pagans, and it was perverted by the pagans, but those letters were written by Jewish rabbim, well-trained, Hebrew speaking from birth up, trained by their predecessors in Torah observance and how to translate and show people how to live according to Torah. They were well trained, and one of them, at least, wrote. Well, actually, I think three of them, but they were writing about an incident, and they said the English is so messed up you can't see the picture. But they talked about the day that Yeshua was baptized, and what they said in a very Jewish way that, like I said, became perverted when it was translated to English. But what they were describing, they said that the Spirit of God came down on him like a dove, came down from heaven like a dove. Well, so what do you see in all these pictures? You see this bird coming down, right? It's flapping. You know what happens when a bird flies down and lands on top of your head, right? You get the big pile of poo on your head, right? I don't like this image at all because it has nothing to do with what those Jews were saying. Those Jews were talking about this very thing. The Spirit of God is what God himself called the Torah, the Word of God. Why? Because Spirit, Ruach, is breath. And where do the words of God come from? Deep inside. And they come up through God's lungs, and they come out through his vocal cords, and that breath comes out, and that breath gives life because it is the breath of life. And his words, his Spirit comes out, and his Spirit is eternal. That's why his words are eternal. And so the Spirit of God, now, if you could imagine Hebrew words written all the way across this thing, you could imagine it being a scroll, a Torah scroll. And what they were trying to tell you is the Torah scroll came down and wrapped itself over. Because they were trying to convey the image of God's feathers coming down and covering this man in that moment. It's an incredible image, right? But it's also trying to teach you something. It's trying to teach you that if you want the Torah scroll wrapped around you, if you want to spend time in God's feathers, what do? You study the Torah. And let me give you an example of how it works and how you can know for sure that I'm right about this and that it does work. For the Christians out there, what do you do every Sunday? You go to church, and what does it do? It makes you feel good. Why? Well, you're either going to a church where the pastor is a motivational speaker, and he's only there to make you feel good anyway, and he's good at it. And the better ones have the bigger churches, right? But others of them, they don't have any skill in that. They don't really know how to do it. They just get up there and do what? Read the Bible. And if you really pay close attention, you would notice that when they read what the Christians call the Old Testament, I'm using air quotes here because it's not an Old Testament, but when they read from that, people go home feeling better longer. When they read from the New Testament, they feel better, but it doesn't last as long. Why? Because it's not coming from God? No, it came directly from God. I've translated it. All of that stuff come right out of the part they call, air quotes again, the Old Testament. It came from the same place. So it should have that lasting effect. The reason why I think it doesn't is because it's translated so horribly. And you can't get into your psyche what's supposed to be there, right? So the words, just hearing those words makes you feel better, right? But if you would do the work, if you would read the book, that would make you feel even better than what the pastor does. If you would study the message, that would make you feel better than just reading it would. The more you lay into God's chest, the more you learn about God's words, any and all of them, the better you're going to feel. It's the way it works. Because it's the more you do it, the more you've laid your head on his chest, the more life that he is giving and sustaining in you, the more protected you'll be. Why is that? Because he protects you if you read his Bible? No, because if you read his Bible and you learn his words, you don't tend to make as many mistakes as you used to. And those mistakes are what get us in trouble. Those mistakes are what give us sleepless nights and give us stresses that are otherwise not necessary. It's not so much that they're self-inflicted. It's just that we haven't learned how to not be affected by it. We haven't learned how to not do certain things or say certain things or whatever. You know, you haven't learned those things. So you read the Torah, it tells you, yeah, don't hang out with these people, don't, because it does do that. There is separation with God. There's separation with all people. You know, I know that the poets and the Hollywood people like to act like there isn't, but there is. Even they separate themselves from their fans, air quotes again. I don't know, probably really are fans out there, but hopefully you're following what I'm saying. There's a sure way to get there, and hopefully after today you'll feel better and you'll believe what I said. Anyway, lay your head on his chest, get in there deep, and don't come back. Shalom, shalom, y'all.